Hi, I'm Jack Titchener. Welcome to a special edition of Illinois Lawmakers as the Illinois General Assembly votes in special session to approve historic pension reform legislation here at the state capitol. Joining us for the program, the Speaker of the Illinois House of Representatives, the Honorable Michael J. Madigan, Democrat of Chicago.
Good evening.
Good to have you on the program, sir. I am certain that you are. The Senate passed the compromise legislation 30-24 here in the House just a few minutes ago as we tape this, 62-53. It's been a long haul, sir.
It's been a long 3 to 4 years struggle to pass this bill. And I want to compliment all of the participants in the legislative process, in particular among House Democrats, Representative Elaine Nekritz, who played a critical role in learning the issue, working with other House Democrats to understand the issue, fashion proposed solutions, served as a member of our conference committee. This has been an extremely difficult issue, an extremely difficult bill to fashion, and then a difficult bill to pass. I played a role in terms of conducting shuttle diplomacy at the very end of the negotiations. And so at the end of the negotiations, I made 2 critical suggestions. One was that in terms of an inflation adjuster in the COLA, that we use the full consumer price index rather than 1/2 of the CPI or going to a flat COLA as we did in the original House bill.
What was the thinking on that, Mr. Speaker?
Thinking there was to bring the Senate Democrats on board for a compromise agreement. Throughout all the discussions, the Senate Democrats have been very concerned about the impact on workers. And that's why they didn't like the flat COLA in the House bill. That's why they were talking about 1/2 of the CPI as an inflation adjuster. And so I took another step and said to them, why don't we go to the full CPI as a concession to Senate Democrats, at the same time working with the Republicans who were demanding high total cost savings of over $160 billion. I made my second critical suggestion, which was to take 10% of the savings coming from the bill and dedicate that to the pension systems.
That's between $1 and $2 billion a year, right?
Correct.
Right.
Takes it back up over $160 billion. Those were the essential suggestions that brought the 4 leaders together in an agreement the day before Thanksgiving.
As you said on the floor a little earlier, there was give and take back and forth between the Democrats and the Republicans. What did the Republicans get out of this deal, sir?
Well, for the Republicans that voted for the bill, they supported the best enactment in the last 3 or 4 years in an attempt to do pension reform. Many, many people in debate said the bill's not perfect, and I would be one of them. It's not perfect, but it's a good faith effort. It's a compromise. We were able to find 30 in the Senate, 62 in the House to pass the bill. I expect that the governor will sign the bill. It's been a long time getting here, but we're here. And so rather than be negative, we ought to be positive, and we ought to come together and work to persuade the Supreme Court to approve this.
Are you confident the Supreme Court will uphold it?
Well, I'm very hopeful that they will uphold it, and I'm not going to try and prejudice their decision by offering my opinion as to what they should do.
You were peppered with a lot of questions on the floor this afternoon from...
They were all very enjoyable.
Oh, yes, indeed. You were asked many times if you were confident that this bill would actually generate the savings that was advertised, $160 billion over 30 years.
Right. And my best answer was that all 4 caucuses had come together in agreement and worked with the pension systems using the actuaries for the pension system to generate these numbers. And at the end, and today, there's a 4-way agreement among the 4 caucuses on the numbers. So there was a check system within our process. Now, those numbers may be wrong, they may be somewhat wrong. We did our best, and we did that in good faith to make sure that we were working with good, solid numbers.
Did Bruce Rauner, the Republican candidate, one of the Republican candidates for governor, did his inserting himself into the discussions at the end impact the outcome in any way?
He may have taken some Republicans off the roll call. When we passed the House pension bill, there were 22 Republicans that voted for the bill. Today, their count was down to 15. I think he made a personal and a political mistake. So on a personal level, he showed that his interest is more about his campaign than the welfare and the well-being of the state of Illinois. And I think he made a political mistake because it certainly appears as if he tried to blow up the deal for purposes of his campaign. I'm sure that his political consultants, his campaign consultants, had been telling him, if there's no solution to the pension problem, it's to your advantage because you can wear your $16 watch and claim you're an outsider. Well, he's lost that issue because action has been taken.
Speaker Madigan, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Congratulations,
Thank you. Nice
sir.
to see you.
Nice to see you.
Sure.
Next up on Illinois Lawmakers, a conversation with two members of the Pension Conference Committee. Representative Elaine Nekritz, a Democrat of Northbrook, has been the House Democrats' point person on the issue for how many months, years now?
I lost track.
And alongside, of course, a Republican member of the Conference Committee, Representative Darlene Senger of Naperville. Good to have you both on the program again.
Thank you.
How much did the compromise that was worked out between the four leaders a few days ago differ from what you and your colleagues had come up with over the summer and fall?
The legislative leaders' compromise is very similar in the structure and in the various levers that might be moved. They tweaked them in ways that the conference committee did not in order to achieve the goal of getting to some additional savings over 30 years.
And that's pretty much, it's pretty much the same package. The only thing that was tweaked, which I think was a good suggestion for tweaking, we were working with the 1/2 of CPI number. Better solution, I think, which came up in the compromise was basically continuing with a CPI for a lesser amount per se, but it's more fair. It was a good, it took where we ended and came up probably with the best.
And it came up with, I think, about $22 billion more in overall savings over the next 30 years between now and 2045.
That's right. So the last number that for a package that the conference committee had scored resulted in about $138 billion in savings, and you're right, the leaders' package is right around $160.
Early on, the committee, of course, zeroed in on the cost of living adjustments for retirees. The 3% compounded annual increase is a major factor that drove this whole discussion.
We use the term of levers. That's the lever that would basically move the cost number the greatest. Anything we did, that lever was always the one that would even move it to any degree we needed to go.
Yeah, a little earlier, Speaker Madigan, in his comments before the conference committee, said that it wasn't really a traditional cost of living adjustment in the way he would define it. He more narrowly defined it as basically an annuity increase that happened automatically.
Well, since the 3% was not tied to anything related to the consumer price index or the cost of living, I think it really is more appropriately termed an automatic annual increase, and I would agree with him on that. I would also agree with Representative Senger that the compromise really does target the increase and protects it the most for those that have the smallest pensions and who have the greatest longevity in working for state government. And I think that's the kind of policy choice that we made that I think is a good one.
Let's go into that a little more deeply. You're basically talking about years of service times $1,000 for people who are not co-enrolled with Social Security. Is that correct?
That's correct.
How does this work?
Well, it's a little complicated. I'm sure
that's why I had you both here.
A lot of time talking to members about this
yes.
over the last 72 hours. But it's basically looking to set a base number on which you would still get a 3% annual increase, and that base number is calculated as $1,000 times the years of service, your working years, and then multiplying again that times the 3%. And as Representative Senger said, the $1,000 does then increase annually by the amount of the consumer price index.
And if you're co-enrolled with Social Security, it's $800
right.
a year. Okay.
And to give you an example how this would work, if you work 30 years and you were a retiree that only had an annuity of $15,000 a year, you're going to get that 3% compounded to that 20, and then you're still going to get a cost of living on top of that. So it really protects those who are in the lower annuity bracket.
What about the argument today, though, from the teachers union representatives that over the course of a typical teacher's employment, they might lose upwards of 50% of their retirement income over this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that really depends on the size of the annuity. If you're getting a $80,000 or $100,000 annuity, that's probably not too far from wrong. But if you're getting a $30,000 to $40,000 annuity, you probably will see no impact whatsoever. In fact, I think the numbers that I've gotten from the speaker staff would indicate that if your annuity is below $42,000 a year, there's no impact to you.
There's some other components to this, of course. The retirement age starts to ratchet up for people who are under the age of 45.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that's again, we were sensitive to those who were, if the closer you were to retirement, the less years you would have to work longer.
And the point of consideration, which was something that came up early on in this whole discussion, was that you have to get something in return. If you're getting less at the end, you have to get something. And so from here on out, if this finally reaches the passage stage, current workers would pay 1% less per year in terms of contributions. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I think you'll see in this bill a real distinction between the impact to those that are still working, who have time to adjust and have time to make their plans differently, versus those that are retired. Those that are retired only see the impact to the automatic annual increase. Those that are still working have increased retirement ages, a salary cap, pauses on their automatic annual increase, as well as so there's
more.
We're asking. We're taking a lot more from active workers and yet giving them something back for that.
Mm-hmm. But still the unions insist this is a diminishment of benefits that were earned, and thus you run up against the Constitution at the end of the day.
And part of the reality here is that, again, the comment was made today about, okay, there was a 1% increase, so that pays for the 3% adjustments every year when you retire, but it does not, and that's the problem that we ran into.
And I just think there's, even on the union-backed proposal, where they said, "Oh, we're not going to sue." Well, there were retiree groups that said immediately that day, "We're going to sue on this." So we were never going to be able to avoid a lawsuit on this. And this is just we've known this from the beginning that we were going to be in court, and the Supreme Court was going to have to make these decisions.
Republicans insisted that there be a 401k option for current employees. How's this going to work?
This was a major policy change that we had great resistance with before, and I was glad to see this come into being. Very simply, what we're saying here is that for 5% of members, up to 5%, they will have an option to be determined what time and how to enroll in a 401k. So your pensions would be frozen, and then you would be in a 401k, which would be matched, and that matching, would be what we call cost neutral. So this is, I think this is a really good policy for, a lot of conservative groups that are saying we need to go entirely into 401k. So it gives you an option for a 401k. It's a good policy for those individuals, for whatever particular reason that would prefer to have a 401k, they have that option.
There's something new in this bill also, that the state guarantees that it will make the full annual contribution to the pensions.
We do have a new lawsuit, a new legal cause of action that's created in this bill, by which the systems can go into court and force the state to make a payment if we fail to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And another piece that didn't get spelled out, and Labor doesn't bring it up, we made it very clear from the beginning, actuarial policy, 30-year closed and using actuarial numbers, that's a major move to do it right. I mean, this phoniness that kept saying, we certify the payment, that's gone. Those days are gone. We don't do that anymore. So that's there.
And the state agrees to pay 10% of the savings from this agreement into the pension funds every year. And when those pension obligation bonds from the Blagojevich years finally expire, those monies will also go into the pension funds?
Yes, they will. And those will also be guaranteed. And those can, if we fail to make those payments, the pension systems can go into court and enforce that payment as well. And that's billions and billions and billions of new tax dollars that were not previously committed to the pension systems going into the pension system. So we hear a lot that, you're doing this all on the backs of the public employees. Well, I think this is a very good balance between impacting benefits, but also putting new resources into the pension systems to shore them up, which will make taxpayers probably unhappy. So everyone's unhappy.
They're still paying for pensions. I mean, there's no question.
In closing, there's also a salary cap in terms of how much you would be able to draw from whatever your salary was in terms of what you would receive in terms of your pension benefits.
Right, there's a pensionable salary cap that is basically the Tier 2 number, which I believe now is 109,000. So that's the cap. If you're above that, you know, you have options to go into your own retirement, but that's going to be your pension. We were running some numbers that along with the cost of living adjustments that are there, and we do have a nice mix here of doing two things: helping those who are on the low scale be comfortable, and helping those where you hear the abuses, where they're $245,000 and $300,000 pensions, get rid of those abuses. And we did have another abuse piece that we took care of in the bill too that didn't get mentioned.
Representative Senger, Representative Nekritz, thanks very much. It's always good to have you on
Good.
Illinois Lawmakers. We appreciate it.
Likewise, Jack.
Good.
Thank you.
Next on Illinois Lawmakers, we talk with two members of the Illinois Senate who came down on opposite sides in the pension agreement vote. Democratic Senator Daniel Biss of Evanston is a member of the conference committee that drafted a lion's share of the agreement that's up for a vote in Springfield. He was a yes vote, as you might imagine. Assistant Senate Republican leader David Luechtefeld of Okawville voted against it. Gentlemen, why did you come down on the sides that you did? Senator Biss, I have a pretty good idea that you're in favor of a bill that basically follows many of the outlines that the conference committee had come up with.
Right, and more broadly speaking, it's a bill that I would say achieves a few goals. First of all, it has very significant and predictable savings for the state. It does that in a way that shelters workers with lowest income and who serve for the longest, and it provides a series of mechanisms to put more money into the systems and restore their health. I think that's a package that, when viewed in totality, can be part of a long-term set of steps to resolve our state's fiscal problems.
Senator Luechtefeld, I know that the Senate Republicans have been on this issue for any number of years now, and that at the end of the day, you still want to reach ultimately the same goal, which would be the full funding of the pension systems, and the people get what they want at the end.
You know, it's a tough issue, obviously. I have consistently felt that what I've seen is unconstitutional. Again, it depends on what lawyer you talk to last. We'll give you an opinion. Again, you know, I guess if this does pass, and I think it's very questionable that it does today, it probably will go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in many occasions, will give you some direction as to what might work. Whether that happens or not, that's the long-range thing. We'll see. I really am not, you know, criticizing those people who are for this. I think they have good intentions. I believe that there is a problem, and they know that. We all know that. And they are trying to solve that problem. I just have believed from day one that what I've seen is unconstitutional.
And let's dig a little deeper into that. What is the fundamental problem with the Illinois Constitution? It comes down to the fact that benefits shall not be diminished,
Right.
correct?
Right. And there are obviously, if they say that it is constitutional, they will have to look to other parts of the Constitution to, I think, rectify that. But that's pretty clear that pensions may not be diminished in the Constitution, and you know what else they may look at, I don't know.
Senator Biss, how did the committee view this in terms of there must be some sort of consideration that was an early thing that your Senate President John Cullerton wanted to make sure that employees and retirees have some kind of say in this thing.
Mm-hmm. So I would say there's two classes of arguments that coexist in support of this bill. The first, as you put it, is the consideration. Now, the bill doesn't offer each individual a right to renegotiate their contract, but it does give to the class of employees some new benefits. First of all, for people still working, it decreases their employee contribution by 1 percentage point. That's a new benefit, and it's money in their pocket today that could be used, for example, to put in a deferred comp program and offset some of the other changes. It also includes a funding guarantee to ensure the state will make its payments going forward. This is something that the state does not currently have in law, and obviously and tragically and inexcusably, the state has skipped and shorted the systems, leading to this problem. So putting in a funding guarantee to address that historic set of mistakes is an important additional piece of consideration. And finally, the bill contains several mechanisms to put additional streams of revenue into the pension systems and shore up their fiscal health. which I think is also some consideration. In parallel to that discussion about consideration, I have the expectation that the Supreme Court will do exactly what Senator Luechtefeld said and essentially balance Article 13, Section 5 of the Constitution, which is the pension clause, against the various other constitutional priorities about education, environment, public welfare, and so forth, as well as other statutory priorities and public purposes. And you've seen, not all the time, but consistently throughout history, courts making these judgments of what do you do when two different priorities, both of which are legally protected, come into conflict. That's a situation where a balance needs to be struck.
You taught government at the high school level for what, 35 years, was it, thereabouts?
Right.
When you break this down, there's a lot probably that you do agree with, but at the end of the day, it's the problem with the diminishment, as I understand it, on your part.
That's true. Again, you never know where the Supreme Court will go, and they can and very likely will look at other parts of the Constitution. I just have talked to a lot of lawyers, for instance, on both sides of this issue. Even they don't agree where it will finally come down. I just have consistently felt that it was unconstitutional. And again, as I said earlier, the people who are trying to do this, I think, mean well, and they're trying to solve a problem. Again, we'll see what happens, and if it's declared unconstitutional, we'll have to be back with something else.
And I want to just follow up on that, because I also agree that different lawyers think different things. This is not a simple slam dunk case. So I'm not here saying that our conference committee report is clearly black and white, no questions asked, open and shut, going to be upheld. I think it is a difficult gray area, and it'll be important, I think, to see what the courts say.
We'll talk a little bit about the politics that have been swirling around this the last few days and weeks.
Do we have to?
Oh, yes, we do. Senator Luechtefeld, you're in a situation where you have at least one of your candidates for governor, Bruce Rauner, saying this thing doesn't go nearly far enough. We want to put everybody in 401ks, guaranteeing that the pensions have first in line when it comes to state funding is a terrible idea.
Well, you'll find in Springfield that most of what happens is about votes and about politics. Again, where he's at on this, I have heard that he's against it, and other members who are running for governor, I think, are torn between what to do. But in the end, an awful lot of what happens in Springfield is about votes, and that's a shame, but that happens. It just over and over, and it's about who will win the next election and who will be the party in charge in the future.
Comes down to 30 in your chamber and 60
Absolutely.
in the House, where we're seated at the moment. Senator Biss, this bill as it's emerging it's a departure from what passed out of the Senate earlier as Senate Bill 2404, which was largely negotiated between the Senate leadership and the labor unions who are represented under collective bargaining. What's in this bill for you that's moving you toward it? Because this is not, what's in it for the Senate Democrats to vote for this thing?
Well, so as you alluded to, there were two very different bills that came out of the spring, and there was a negotiation internal to the conference committee all summer long, and then supplemented by the leaders in the fall. And there's no question the Senate Democrats will have moved significantly to come around and support this bill. That said, this bill has a series of significant departures from Senate Bill 1. It has very, very important inflation protections that Senate Bill 1 entirely lacked in the way it changes the cost of living adjustment. It has additional protections for retirees who will not experience skips to their cost of living adjustment, unlike in Senate Bill 1. Its retirement age changes are more gentle. It decreases the employee contributions, and then it finds all this additional money to put into the system. So it has some commonalities with Senate Bill 1 in broad structure, but it asks less of the employees. It puts more money into the system, and I think while it's a difficult vote for a lot of Senate Democrats, I think many of us will conclude that it's the best deal that we're going to get, given the landscape in the state and in the legislature.
That being the case, there's probably not ever a perfect bill. To your mind, though, Senator Luechtefeld, given the constraints that we're up against, given the lay of the land of the situation, what more would you like to see in the bill before you could perhaps turn around and support it?
Well, again, I think it's hard to get past my objection to this bill, and that is the constitutionality of it. And again, we take an oath to uphold the Constitution. And again, I'm sure that I've voted for bills already that maybe turned out to be unconstitutional. So I don't claim to know, be certainly the last voice on whether this is or not. I just have felt it is. Today will be, I think, I always say that the days are interesting days. This one will be an interesting day. Whatever happens, whatever way it goes, it will be certainly an interesting day in Illinois history.
No question about it. Senator Biss, Senator Luechtefeld, thanks very much for your time joining us on Illinois Lawmakers. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
That is it for this special edition of Illinois Lawmakers. We will tentatively return to the Capitol in January with live coverage of Governor Pat Quinn's annual State of the State address, currently set for noon on Wednesday, January 29th. Watch our website, illinoislawmakers.org, for details. From all of us at Illinois Lawmakers, so long from Springfield.